Hi, I'm Emily Peterson. I'm an associate professor in the School of Education.
Yeah, sure. And hi, everyone. I'm Clarissa Ihssen. I'm the science librarian here, so I'm part of the library.
Okay. And we're going to do a couple, I guess, quick introductions. Oh, yes. That's okay. Yeah, so why we're interested in this session, I think we're going to share some resources at the end, and we're going to email slides out to folks who are on our list. So if you're not registered for the session or you don't get the email, feel free to contact us, and we're happy to send our set of slides. We're really changing up until the moment of. So we didn't want to send them out ahead of time, but we will. And there's some resources at the end for some of the different things we're going to talk about. And we got connected through one of those potential resources, I guess, which is Clarissa will talk about in a little bit, one of the library services that they offer. I'm interested in this topic because I was trained as a graduate student how to write systematic lit reviews. I've written a bunch of lit reviews of different styles, and I find that my students struggle with them. And then I have started implementing some of the practices I use for my own lit reviews into my classes, and so I wanted to kind of share some of those.
All right, great. And coming from the opposite side, I'm the librarian, so I do a lot of the searching and teaching people how to search, and then I never see them again. So the rest of the writing portion is here for Emily. We got connected through the library's systematic review team service thing, which I also co-lead with my friend Katie here, friend coworker. So we lead and help support and consult on systematic reviews for your own research, for graduate students, for anything like that. So that is one of the resources at the end if you're interested in doing your own research into a systematic review. But some of these things that I'll be talking about are strategies that are just useful in our general searching as well.
Okay, so before we get into presenting a bunch of stuff, so I wanted to just present a model about why multiple source use tasks are challenging. But first, I'm going to open it up to folks. I'm going to give us like maybe 2 or 3 minutes to turn and talk to a friend, or a future friend. What do you think's the most challenging of that aspect of writing a lit review? And what do you think your students think is the most challenging aspect of writing a lit review? And when I'm thinking about lit reviews, you could be doing lit reviews as a standalone piece or project. It could be lit reviews in the sense of, so I guess I'm often thinking of them as like writing a paper, but giving a PowerPoint presentation summarizing prior research is kind of a means of communicating prior research. And so you could think about those types of tasks, as well as like intros to essays or other sorts of things, research proposals and such. So let me give you just a couple minutes to chat about those. Take about 30 seconds to wrap up. Okay, we would love to hear a few examples of things that are coming to the forefront as challenges. So we're entering the share portion of our Think, Pair, Share here.
Thank you. Now we're asking for the share portion of the Think, Pair, Share. What do you think is the most challenging aspect of writing a lit review? Getting started. Anyone else? Stopping. Yeah. The beginning and the end of the spectrum. Any other challenges? Ooh, the scope, the question. Yeah. Maybe that's why it's hard to start. What's that hand? The strategy. Great. Excellent.
Are these the same ones as for your students?
Yeah. So both. Okay. So is there anything different for your students, do you think? The internet makes it harder? Still are. Other things, yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's really hard. In libraries, we say, yeah, you're joining the scholarly conversation. Other things. Oh, well. I don't want to talk about that. Without practice. Yeah. Other thoughts? Uh-huh. Mm-hmm. Right. One other thought? Anyone? All right. So it sounds like we are struggling with the beginning portions of it, but we think that our students are struggling with the actual bigger questions and the practicing, right?
Yeah, I was gonna say, are we gonna talk about the starting and stopping? Kind of. I feel like we're talking more about the beginning and the middle. Yeah, so if you are interested, there is a whole literature. I'm coming from educational psychology, and so there's a literature about multiple source use. To sum it up, it's super challenging. We're thinking about students are coming with a lot of information and knowledge that is very different from the knowledge that we as professors might have. And they're having to essentially integrate what's in their memory and what we call these memory resources with what's available for the task model. So what does an essay entail? What does writing a lit review entail? Like, how many sources are needed? What types of sources? How do I even structure a lit review? Those sorts of things. And also the documents themselves. And so you can take a look at this later. But it's just essentially there's just so many different steps to this process that students can have the opportunity to either succeed, and we're going to talk about some tools that can kind of get through. And so we're kind of thinking about this whole thing is about writing a lit review. Part of this is information literacy. Some of these things maybe beyond this session, and we want the library to come assist.
So anytime a librarian says, I can come help you with information literacy, we're probably talking about that stuff in the square, amongst many other things. But of these skills, it's that area. Great. So first, before we get started, I want to talk about some outdated research notions and how we can update things. We've all been doing research for a very long time, and we're very confident in our skills. But there's some ideas, kind of like myths of research, that For the new year, I want to take out and bring in some new things. So for this year, out, research is a linear process, and in, research is inquiry, and it's a flexible process. So we know as skilled researchers that finding new information should change our ideas and our processes, which means a research project is and should be open to changing these things. However, the ways that our assignments are typically structured, where you choose a topic and then find literature and then you move on, doesn't convey that to students, where they're used to choosing a topic and then trying to find articles that support their thesis, which is also not great science and not great research, right? We use what the literature says. So emphasizing research is flexible will help make sure that students don't see finding literature as just like a checkbox they have to do. To accomplish this, we can try a couple different things, talking about research with inquiry and curiosity and exploration and giving more time to this searching process, learning about finding, reading, and citing information, communicating in different styles of communicating what we're finding. So ultimately, dwelling on that exploratory phase, focusing on asking questions. We've talked about that, right? How do we form a question? If you can, delay having your students select a topic. So say, think about something you're interested in, do a little research, and then come back and select your topic. Help narrowing the scope of research questions. Everything you've identified are challenges and ways we can move forward. Once again, research is learning, and we rarely learn in a straight line. Next, students are criminals and plagiarism is theft. We have this a lot where we really emphasize plagiarism is bad. There's this moral corruption. Instead, I want us to start thinking about all ideas are built on the work of others. As we know, nobody's an island, right? And citing correctly takes practice. Students don't want to plagiarize. I mean, there's the one, but generally speaking, students don't want to, right? They're trying their best to meet these expectations, and the fear and anxiety placed on students by faculty members saying plagiarism is theft, you are criminals, this is bad, leads to such anxiety that they're more likely to make mistakes or just not try at all. And of course, we need to make mistakes to learn too, right? So I call this like the scared straight model of plagiarism. So combined with that and their inexperience and ambiguities, it's just an anxiety mess. So instead, try to avoid referring to plagiarism as a moral failing or a crime. Acknowledge the complexity, and sometimes even faculty members need to look up. Every journal is different. It's normal to not know how to cite something off the top of your head. Explore the value of citations. Like, why do we cite to begin with? Not because we're avoiding plagiarism, but because we're acknowledging the ideas of other people, right? Providing the transparent expectation of why we're doing this and of collaboration can be helpful. And then provide opportunities for practice, especially if you're using a more niche or uncommon, or you're working with like undergraduate students, right? And finally, requiring scholarly sources to practice understanding scholarly sources. It's quite the conundrum. So instead, focus on the information need. If somebody came to me and said, you need to read this medical thing in order to understand what your doctor is telling you, I'm not going to succeed, right? But we come to students and we say, practice reading scholarly sources in order to understand scholarly sources. It's not meshing with how students actually access and use this information. They're not practicing reading the whole thing. They're just going to pull from the abstract, the introduction, or the conclusion to get that information they need. So instead, examine your assumptions about students' future use of scholarly literature. I'm not saying never use it, but let's examine when we actually need it. Allow for other information packages. Again, this is more for that lower undergraduate level. Do they need to be using scholarly sources to explain why metal rusts? Or can we use an encyclopedia, right? So think like encyclopedia, handbook, other forms of information that are just as acceptable, but not that peer-reviewed gold standard. And then finally, sometimes we need to teach scholarly reading strategies. I do this with science students all the time. How do you read it? What does it mean to actually understand something? Usually I'll emphasize students that like not even professors read something once and understand it. It takes time and practice in going back. So all of these strategies are ways to decrease anxiety around that just general research process. So I have all of them listed again. We're going to think, pair, share with our teams. Which of these research notions do you currently use or subscribe to? And which one do you think you are going to resolve to change this new year? I'll give you another 2 minutes to think about that. I'm giving you 30 more seconds. Okay, time is up. Turn around. I can't clap this time, sorry. All right, great. What are we changing for this new year? What is out for us? Nothing's out? Yeah. Requiring? Yeah. Great. Right. Yeah. Other things? What's in? What are we going to do different? Yeah. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Right. Great. All right. Thanks for sharing your resolutions. Moving on, let's talk about finding your resources. So this is where we get to the library part of it. There is a difference between search engines, catalogs, and databases, even though they try to trick you into all thinking they're the same thing. There's also a difference between subject headings and keywords, even though, once again, they try to trick you into thinking they're the same thing. So search engines, catalogs, databases look similar, run completely differently. The one we're most familiar with, Google Scholar. Who uses Google Scholar? Show of hands. Lots of people, right? We all use it. It's fun and easy. It uses an algorithm to find and sort the information. It might allow you to see everything that exists in the world, but realistically, it's a black box. I don't know how it works. I don't know how it operates. Things can change. It runs on information it collects on you, so every single one of us could run the same search and get different results. Not great for research methodology, right? We want replicability. Next would be some sort of library catalog. Think the AU Library search bar. This is going to show you everything the library owns or has access to, but that's probably not going to be everything that exists in the world. So these are kind of in the middle because it will show you things. They're collected and organized by humans, and I can tell you how it runs in the background. So we could all run the same search and get similar results, which is good. Great. Finally, we have databases. These are like the gold standard for librarians. They are often subject-specific collections of books, journals, articles, other kinds of gray literature. These are collected and organized by humans. Every article is often tagged with these subject headings, and a good database will include the thesaurus to find these subject headings, which allow searching. So think Academic Search Premier, ERIC, PubMed, whichever discipline you are in, they usually have like their database that you would use. So when we're running searches, Google Scholar is a good place to start, but when we're trying to be comprehensive and we're trying to find all of the information that exists, you'll probably want to use databases because they are replicable. So when we're using keywords versus subject headings, they activate different searches and how they run on the back end. So when we're using databases, and I'm just going to be talking about databases from here on because different rules apply. When we're using keywords, they will just search for the exact word or phrase in the title or the abstract. Very rarely it will do full text, but generally title and abstract, that exact word or phrase. And that's usually what we need, what our students need to find those 5 articles, that top basic level for us. But when we're trying to go in depth, when we're trying to find all of the information, or if we have a student that's doing a very niche topic, what we're going to need are these subject headings. So subject headings are a specific word or phrase that will pull out any resource tagged with this term. So it doesn't have to appear in the title, the abstract. It doesn't have to appear anywhere in the paper. If it's a related concept or it's in this article is about this concept, it will be tagged with that. So these are more powerful because it will pull you everything that exists on this topic without even using that word in the title or the abstract. So that's why we do it. I think we're running a lot of time. Yeah. So I'm not going to do my other activity, but any questions about searching? Yes. Sure. Librarians add them into the thesaurus and then they text it. So this is the fun. So subject headings are why library science is a science, right? So I said I'm the science librarian. I have a background in environmental science. A person who works at EBSCO is a librarian, and they also have a background in a niche thing of science and the library degree. So they work there and as they read the literature, they start noticing things. It has to have a critical mass of terms, and then you'll get it. So for a long time in psychology, microaggression wasn't a subject heading because not enough research was on it for microaggression, but now it is, right? So when we're searching, sometimes if it's such a new concept, we have to go something older or different. But we get new ones all the time, every year, just based on how your research develops. Good question. Anything else? All right, great. Oh, yeah. Yeah. I love a good image. So if you just like Google Boolean and then do the Google image search, it'll have like and in the Venn diagrams. And I just talked about that. Students are relatively familiar with Boolean operators. They just don't know it as Boolean operator. Not is the most confusing one for them. But if you do an and, they're great at that. Good question. Great. Now, for why you're all here, you found your sources.
Another quick thought on that. If you use something like ProQuest, you can basically, it will create the Boolean search for you after you put in the fill in the blanks. And so that gives an example of like a Boolean search. If I want to search for like some examples I'm going to use are like curiosity and learning, I don't have to know like exactly how to set that up. It'll set it up and then I can like tweak the code that it is. Okay. All right. So, when I'm thinking about trying to support students writing lit reviews for various purposes, including students who are writing theses and dissertations down to like first year complex problem seminars, I'm thinking about how do I help students make choices about what sources are relevant for what their question is. I was thinking as we were going through, I think a lot about writing a lit review in terms of having a question and using a lit review as a research technique to answer that question. I don't know that my students often think about that because they're thinking about from the thesis, but a lot of the examples, and this may or may not work in your field, but a lot of the examples I'm using are related to the questions. I like to think about extracting data. I think actually using a more systematized approach to doing lit reviews it does kind of feel like I'm almost a computer or being AI, but to do the lit review, but I think that breakdown can be helpful. And so I think about each paper that I'm reviewing as having some data in it, and I'm going to pull that data out and take some systematic notes on it, and then helping students to find patterns in this data. So that's really general. Specifically, I would say what I was taught in undergrad was a variety of things, mostly annotated bibliographies, or I was telling Clarissa my favorite strategy, read all the articles and then just kind of wing it and see what happens. And that's fine if you have like a really good memory, and it's fine if you have like 5 or 10 sources. But if you have any sort of learning disability or you acquire one or you need to do 40 sources, it suddenly becomes untenable. So I like to use lit tables. Actually, I'm one of the resources will link. I love them so much. I wrote a blog post last week in advance for this so that I share a little bit more about that with all you. And we're going to talk about citation managers, and I haven't used this, but I need to, and you'll see why. Systematic review software I've just learned about like over the summer, and it blew my mind. But I'll tell you about that and maybe why you and or your students might want to use it. So citation managers highly recommend for students that are in like a master's or PhD program, for faculty for obvious reasons. You're trying to keep track of lots and lots of sources. There's lots of reasons why you might use them. I'll talk really briefly about that. The big ones are Zotero, Mendeley, and Note Basic. One of the resources we have on the end of these slides is the library has a sort of guide as to like why you might pick one of these over the other. I don't know that it really matters. I think Zotero and Mendeley are kind of the more preferred in general. And Note keeps like kind of changing how much you have to pay, stuff like that. So the student's like, what? I only need 3 sources. I only need 5 sources. Why would I use a citation manager? I don't need something to manage this. And so my arguments, essentially you can save the articles along with the PDF. You can have a browser plugin that when you do your search or just search on Google Scholar or search through a library database, it'll automatically upload it to your library, including the PDF. You can take notes on the PDF. You can add tags about like topics that were discussed in there. You can then add citations in Word or Google Docs. And I'll show an example of a sample assignment you could have students do. And it will automatically create a reference list for you that updates, which is beautiful, especially if you need to change from like APA to like science, like different numbering schemes, or you change at like, anyway, if you use numbering schemes for site, I can't imagine doing this without a citation manager. If you do, bless you. So students should use this. It does allow flexibility to change between citation styles. Clarissa was mentioning that sometimes students come to like library appointments and they're like, here's a link to my article, and you click it and it's a dead link and you're like, oh, I don't have this anymore. And so this kind of keeps students from having to save all those PDFs in various places. It's kind of centralizing an organizational place. I like to think about my role as kind of teaching students some tools for lit reviews or other sorts of things that may be useful in the future, even if they don't know what the utility will be. And so I think this is useful potentially for writing a thesis or writing a Fulbright fellowship, and you don't know if you're going to be needing it. So it's a lot easier to get started when you only have 3 or 5 sources that you need to keep track of, and instead of so many. Okay. So this is essentially what Zotero looks like. So you can see over on the side. So this is all the sources I have for a particular project. It's just saved in a folder. And here's a PDF, and I could add tags to it. I can take notes, all of that stuff. I'm just going to save. Oh, you can't see. Okay. Hopefully. I also use dark mode for like everything, so this may look a little bit funky. But yeah, the whole PDF is saved and attached. You can choose to link or not, so you may run out of space if you have too many, but your students are unlikely to do that. Quick sample assignments. You could do these at home as take home, or you could do them in class. So something you might have students do, say, ask them to find 3 relevant peer-reviewed articles, or it doesn't have to be peer-reviewed. If you want to use podcasts or blogs or whatever you want, they don't have, this will work on basically all of the information. It's saving things like titles and type of source, and then it will create a reference list that it like is good enough-ish usually, for most sources. So you could ask them on something like a weekly discussion board post to put the research question that they're thinking about and that the sources they found for, and then make a screenshot of their Zotero app on their computer that shows that they have the PDFs for all of those. So that way you're sure students have resources. You can see a real quick glimpse at the like titles of those, to see like, are they on the right track? Another assignment, something that I might like to do in class. So one thing students I find have trouble with is adding more than one citation to support a claim, like at the end of a sentence. Like it's like, oh, well, Smith 2001, oh, wow, what year are we? 2021 said this. Oh, Jones said it too, but I already cited Smith, so I don't need to cite Jones too. Well, I want you to cite I want you to have more evidence. And so if you have students, they've saved their stuff in Zotero, they've got 3 articles on a topic, you could have them do a really easy thing. Researchers have studied curiosity. Here's 3 citations, and actually in the Google Doc force them to like put all 3 citations there and then create their reference list for that one sentence that they've written, just to get their feet wet with the idea that like you can how to add citations using Zotero or whatever your citation manager is. That like they then can auto do a reference list, and then they're kind of starting to get on their way to like how to make this happen for a longer assignment. Okay. All right. Lit tables. Are you familiar with this? Okay, perfect. Okay. All right. So these are some examples I used for lit tables when I was in my, I'm going to go to the next slide, in my grad school. Essentially a lit table is creating a table to track different information and the same information about each article. So I usually think I think about it as having like 4 key components. So each article is going to get its own row. So I want to know what the citation is. I usually just like to use whatever my citation format is. You could get fancy and link it to Zotero and then have it all right there. But you might just have author, year, article title. Who are the participants? I teach Ed Psych as one of my main classes. And so my students have really struggled to understand what an empirical study is. So somebody that's written a study that they've like collected data on participants versus reading a lit review. What is the most important part to get out of an empirical study? what was the actual results of the study? But they're like, oh, but the lit review part of the article was more fun and interesting. And like, okay, but that's useful, but it's not what we're looking at. And so by saying like, who were the participants, when they read it and they're like, there were none, you're like, oh, okay, then that doesn't go in your lit table. Like that could be a good article for you, but like that's not an empirical study that you're going to review for this particular project. I'm talking about variables here. You can talk about constructs or concepts. And I'll give a couple examples. If you have each different variable is going to kind of maybe get its own column. So you have some information about, let's say you're writing your review about curiosity and learning, curiosity, information about how did they measure curiosity, information about how they measured learning, and then what were the results. And so I'm going to take this and modify it slightly. And here's our example. I study curiosity. That's why I'm using that as examples. I've written this lit review. So essentially, I might want to then provide a little bit of information. So if my questions about how can teachers support students' curiosity for learning? How was curiosity supported in the study? What were the students learning about? And then what was the result that answers this question? And so it's essentially asking students to extract or pull really specific data. I like to do this when I'm writing lit reviews. I'm going to give some quick examples of how you modify this. So if I was thinking about this whole idea of research as an iterative process, I modify my table as I'm going after a couple of articles, usually after a couple of articles, or if I've like read and know the literature really well, I'm going to kind of take that really 4 category format and make it my own. I think you kind of do need to have a research question to start this though, as I was thinking about that. So it's like, you need to have a little bit of knowledge before you get into it, or an interesting research question, in which case you might be like, oh, there's not enough stuff to put in my table, or there's like 100 articles. I can't table 100 articles, or maybe you can if it's your dissertation. So you could do something like, if I'm starting with this really simple one. So I did a meta-analysis recently about like mental spatial skills and science learning. And we first were just kind of tracking participants, but then we said like, we actually want to know how many, separate from like what grade level the students were, how many females and how many non-white. We wanted to track all of that data separately. And so you could take a column and just split it up. It's really easy to add in these columns or split these columns as you go. But you just have to remember to go back. There's more complicated things you could do. So if we go back to that curiosity example, having known the literature, I was able to essentially say, well, I know that there's kind of a few different categories of ways that there's been supports for curiosity, and some focus on individual factors, some focus on classroom factors, and some focus on how teachers and students interact. And so I then was able to track each of those for all the articles I read to kind of identify like, oh, there's a few articles about teacher-student interactions, but not that many. But then when I want to go and write the paragraph or a couple paragraphs about how do teacher-student interactions support curiosity, I know exactly which articles touch on that. And so I was kind of able to split it up. Oh, we have 5 minutes? Okay, cool. This, I would say, usually will work better for more advanced students or students that already have a conceptual framework in mind. So if you have another theory you want to use and kind of set up your review. Okay. So I have students in my classes do lit tables. In my complex problems class is a class on what is intelligence. I actually have them keep a lit table for all of our readings for the whole semester, which some of them love and some of them hate. But essentially it's a really simple, like, what is the citation? How did the author define intelligence? And what are the other like sort of main findings from there? That way their note taking is really systematic, is super quick to grade. I love that about it. But then they can go back at the end of the semester and they're like, oh, well, I want to find evidence that like some people talked about it in this way. And I'm like, well, just go to your lit table. It's there. You've been tracking this. So I think lit tables help identify relevant sources. I think about this. I like the funnel metaphor, but I think students misinterpret it. The first time I taught a master's class, education class, and I think that I needed like 8 sources. Most of them, like 7 sources, were setting up why the problem that they wanted to study was important. And there was like 1 or 2 sources on like, what if other people found? And I was like, oh, I need to be specific about like setting up the context versus the meat of the lit review. And so I think if you have a lit table, if you can't put your article in the lit table, or if it's missing most of its columns, like it shouldn't be one of those sources. And then now I kind of try to separate, like you might need 3 or 4 context setting sources and then the rest of the sources that answer your research question. And it helps differentiate these empirical or primary sources from lit reviews or other types of sources. I like how it helps me organize my thinking. I can start to look for patterns in more systematic ways. I can just take a column and be like, okay, what am I noticing when I look down this column? Oh, people have almost exclusively studied spatial thinking in undergraduates, and there's a few studies in elementary school, but they're all on these very niche topics. And so it helps to identify gaps in kind of like a more systematic way than just being like, I need to read 40 papers, or I need to read 10 papers or 5 papers or whatever, and then try to somehow make some patterns in my brain. Well, I can use this scaffold to do that. It can help make incremental progress on a task that's really daunting. So I can easily be like, oh, I'm just going to add one more article to my table today, or I'm going to find one pattern. And it can help to kind of alleviate I'm going to write a paper and I need each paragraph to summarize article 1. What did they do? What did they find? Article 2. What did they do? What did they find? I've heard it laundry list, to setting it up. So like, okay, I need to write a paragraph that summarizes some of the patterns in this column, or the gaps. So sample, I have 1 minute left. Okay, beautiful. Wait, don't we have till 20? No. I have 5 minutes. Okay, I'm going to, no, we go till 20. Yeah. Oh, please. Okay, cool. So I always tie the lit table with the research question. So I would ask students to write a research question and change the lit table. And maybe that's the assignment for today, just to fit their question before they even find anything. Or I might ask them to table a certain number of articles. We'll often do an example in class with my ed psych just on an article that was assigned for the day for me to show them exactly like how do you extract information to put in the table. And so there's all different variants you could use for this. My hot tip, group assignments. This works really great because you just add a column for student name. And then if you say, oh, you need to find like 2 articles per person, then each person like gets their credit and you can see who's done what work. And then you can provide some prompts for discussion that they need to go to their lit table. This is what I do with colleagues when I write collaborative lit reviews. We might all read some of the different articles. Some key ones we'll all read together, but like we're all going to dump our stuff in this lit table and then we go back and we look at the whole thing. But that's more manageable for a group project than looking at having to read all 10 articles, or truth be told, like 2 people in the group read the articles and the other people are like, oh, here's what I'm going to contribute. Okay, last thing that I haven't used, but I just want to make you all aware about it because I was so excited when I saw it and was like, when I do my next. So this is great for a systematic or systematized review where you have really strict criteria of what is in and out of your search. So Covidence, RAN, Max QDA, Epi Reviewer are the most common ones. Most of them you need to pay a little bit to get the better tools as part of it. Essentially leads you through the steps of doing a systematic lit review. It follows things like the Prisma guidelines and Cochrane, and like so it will you're essentially entering data. You can import your search, and you essentially are making decisions. Do I include or exclude this article based on the title and abstract? And you make those, or is it a maybe? And some of them are almost like swipe left, swipe right types situations where you're saying like in or out. And then when you do full text review, it lets you import the data into your kind of like modified form. So if you're like, I need to pull the number of participants, I need to pull this particular correlation, I need to pull this measure, I can do that. This is why I need to do this because this was a minuscule portion of data we entered in a massive spreadsheet for us, like a systematic meta-analysis that we did. Anyway, that was a nightmare. And I'm like, why? I'm not going to do this again. This is what Covidence's interface looks like. So I imported some references. It has different stages: title and abstract, screening, full text, data extraction from the article. I don't know that I would have my undergraduates do this, but I would say I probably would have my PhD students and maybe a master's student if they were like really keen on like getting a grasp and they had a really good idea for like a systematic review. Okay, we have 0 time to reflect. So there is some resources here. Yeah, so I love that AU has some resources around systematic reviews. That is a very specific type of review that I do not ask undergraduates to do, but I think can be useful. I think the resource is probably better for faculty and grad students. So the systematic review software, this is reviewing all different options and has kind of like a checklist of like what might work for you best. This is an article I wrote about lit tables with a bunch of examples. And then this is AU's guide about citation. We have 30 seconds for a question. Oh, wow. Yeah, we didn't. That's why we got a 5-minute warning. Okay, we would super love if you fill out the survey, or there's some physical copies in the back or in the front.
Thank you all for coming.